Brandon Thurston from WrestleNomics is up next, and we're going to follow Brandon with John Pollock from Post Wrestling.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone.
But we can't ignore the math, okay? We can't ignore the data.
Go on Google Trends, type in your name, then type in mine. You're a straight line, I'm a pyramid.
I like the very direct question on that.
Television ratings, downward spiral. Buy rates, plummeting.
The time is now to turn the math around.
It is time for another edition of Pollock and Thurston. Here we are, and Brandon, it is Q4/year-end 2024 week at TKO.
It is. They sent out a press release timed right when we start here at 1 o'clock. Did you see this? This just hit our inboxes.
They know what's up. They know exactly the target audience. They have a deadline. We got to get this out by 1. We got to get that mention right off the top. TKO announces Takeover in Kansas City as UFC, WWE, and PBR. Not Pabst Blue Ribbon, folks. No, professional bull riding is coming to the T-Mobile Center in April. So get ready. Presented by VeChain. TKO Takeover presented by VeChain. That rolls off the tongue. Yes, so we will have VeChain. 3 dynamic live sports and entertainment experiences over 5 days. Professional bull riders on Thursday, April 24th. UFC Fight Night, Saturday, April 26th. Raw on Monday, April 28th. So you're getting a TKO takeover without presenting a takeover by NXT.
Do you know what VeChain is?
I wouldn't even begin to want to be put on the spot to describe what VeChain is. Something that I will not be
something involving the blockchain. Something crypto like, I think.
Something that I think the UFC audience would, that is their target audience.
Sure.
I think, absolutely.
So. VeChain is a leading blockchain foundation for enterprise applications. Well, that explains that.
Got it. Perfect. All right. Well, there you have it. Breaking news. Coming up on today's show, we are going to be joined by Greg Oliver of Slam Wrestling, joining the show for the first time. We're going to talk a little bit about some Toronto wrestling history with Greg Oliver, who has been covering this as long as anybody. And we are counting down until the activation that is Elimination Chamber at the Rogers Center in Toronto, Ontario.
30,000 tickets out somewhere somewhere close to that was the last I saw.
Yes. Do you have any guesstimate yet on potential gate level for this?
The real question is, what will be the caveats that will be
the percentage? Yes.
Well, no, this is the biggest gate ever in Canada, not in North America, because there's all the WrestleMania.
This will, I'm sure they will be able to promote this as the largest gate in Canadian history. Like this should top, like this will like by a sizable amount, I feel, surpass the like WrestleMania 2002. The gate in US dollars at that time in 2002 was about 3.8 million. So I think this one will be comfortably ahead when you are looking at the level of pricing for this, which I think makes up for the fact that there are 30,000 tickets out in a stadium that can hold much more, but the revenue from these 30,000 is going to be gigantic.
Yes, and they probably, even adjusting for inflation, they might break that record. I don't know if they'll go that far in clarifying inflation, because then I'll have to think about. Well, I've been thinking about. Then they'll make people think about inflation, which they're not quite breaking their own records for inflation just yet.
So we will talk with Greg Oliver about some of that. We're also going to be going through several lawsuits. Always fun on people's docket when we have not just Ryan Nemeth filing a lawsuit, but we also have an update on a several years old consolidated shareholders lawsuit. But I know that my co-host here, his eyebrows just raised when he saw the term meeting minutes.
Yes, records.
Documents. So we're going to get into a little bit of that as well on the show. But first, we start off with a report from the one and only Brandon Thurston when it comes to WWE employee morale. Always a sore spot when we can talk about morale and WWE employees. How do you think they reacted when they got their press release this morning that all Class A shareholders of TKO are being issued $75 million in dividends?
Yes.
38 cents per share as the stock hovering at $160 going into this this earnings release on Thursday.
The earnings is today, is it not?
I thought it was Thursday.
I thought it was no, you're right. No, it's tonight. I was tweeting earlier that it was tonight. I will check on this though. But yes, they're not only doing a dividend. So this is the first time that TKO will do a dividend. WWE did a dividend for years and years, but this is their own dividend, and it is tonight. Yeah, they are doing the earnings call tonight. The call is at 5 p.m. Eastern. They usually drop documents a little bit before that. And they are doing a buyback as well. So, I mean, this is a company that expects to be very profitable. They should be more profitable because of the merger and the consolidation of services under the Endeavor flywheel. And they've got a lot of cash. So they're really cash rich here. And the merger is going even better than expected, according to CEO Ari Emanuel on the last earnings call. However, this has not resulted in greater rewards to the typical WWE corporate employee. If anything, they have lost some of their benefits. They are not getting raises in the same manner that they got raises before the merger. The benefits that have been cut, as I reported a week or two ago, they've lost access to this 15% discount that they could have. They could have money taken right out of their paycheck and buy WWE shares at a 15% discount. That's been no more ever since the WWE stock sort of went away and just became TKO stock. So they haven't been able to get access to that, and they haven't been able to get access to another benefits program, this WWE Superstar program, where workers could give each other. I imagine, when somebody did a good job, when you had a great interaction with another employee or something, like you could give them points that would be redeemable for either cash or gift cards or certain travel.
I want to know more about this WWE Superstar program. This is the first I had ever heard of this program, and it had me greatly intrigued about how this works. I think we could implement this potentially.
So I understand that's been discontinued more recently, around the turn of the new year. So that's been discontinued as well. And they've also lost access to complimentary live event tickets for WWE events. I reached out to WWE for comment and TKO for comment. They did not respond. You might imagine that they would point to how high the demand is for their tickets right now, so they can't be giving away tickets for free. We've heard about some reductions in comp tickets in general. Nonetheless, there's been a reduction in those other benefits, the peer-to-peer rewards program, the discount in the stock program. And despite employees getting favorable performance reviews when that would normally result in a pay raise, pre-TKO, that has not. They've been given a 3% cost of living raise, is what I've been told, which is hardly keeping up with the rising cost of living in places like Connecticut and New York around W headquarters.
Yeah, I found that to be, very interesting. The fact that not just the pay raises as well, trying to keep up with escalation in living costs. There's also the spillover effect of this merger that is typical in a lot of these situations, where those that are left, part of the quote unquote redundancies is that a lot of the spillover work, it lands on your plate. And it sounds like that is what you're hearing as well, is that now if you were in charge of XYZ under WWE, there's UFC work maybe falling onto your lap. There is the potential of more now that TKO is getting involved in the big world of PBR. And
yes, I was told it was reminiscent of when the XFL was relaunched by Vince McMahon in 2018, 2019 until COVID stopped it short. But they've been given extra work to do related to UFC, and there are concerns. It hasn't happened yet, but there are concerns that with PBR coming out of Endeavor and going into TKO, if that's going to result in more work. So that's a concern. Meanwhile, as I said, they're going to spend $2 billion. They've said they're going to spend about $2 billion over the next 3 or 4 years on buying their own stock. They've got the cash to do that. They've got the cash to give their Class A shareholders, that is the non-Endeavor shareholders, a 38% dividend, $75 million per quarter. And the executives, the major executives, have been rewarded well for completing this merger. Ari Emanuel. I've got it listed out here. Let me see if I can pull it up. $20 million is what Ari Emanuel got for the completion of this merger in cash, not to mention another roughly now worth $60 million in terms of equity. TKO's COO, Mark Shapiro, your favorite, he got a $5 million cash bonus upon completion of the merger. This is September 2023. He also got about $50 million worth of equity at this point. Nick Khan got $15 million more on that in the shareholder lawsuit. He got $15 million in cash. Paul Levesque got $5 million in cash. Frank Riddick got $5 million in cash. And they're also, not only do they got those bonuses aside, but they also get a base salary, of course, but they also get bonuses that are tied to the performance of the company, including the profitability of the company. So the more profitable TKO is, the more pay they get, which is very typical, very natural, very normal for a publicly traded company. You want to have your executives, your leaders, your decision makers making choices that are going to benefit the shareholders. So that'll only make sense. But I bring that up in light of contrasting it against the lack of compensation and benefits and rewards that employees are getting.
What have the WWE employees, what has their, did you reach out to their union representation? What did they have to say about any of these?
Not applicable. Like wrestlers who work for WWE, like the UFC fighters who work for UFC, corporate employees at WWE are not represented by any union, which is something that they've made clear in their filings in the past.
So this is the part of the town hall that WWE did not post onto their video services a few weeks ago. But yeah, it does stand to kind of just give you kind of a fully formed view of a lot of these companies.
And about the town hall too. So I understand at the most recent town hall, there were questions, and there have been repeated questions at these town hall meetings where employees, they can ask questions. And one thing that's been asked about repeatedly is whether the stock program was going to come back. And that resulted in finally an email being sent internally to say basically, no, the stock program isn't going to continue. So at least they got an answer about that.
And that program, it allowed employees to be able to buy stock at a 15% discount,
yes,
correct?
Yes.
So that part has been, eliminated. And I mean, this is part of the entire strategy of when this merger went through, was the fact that they were going to be very, very aggressive when it came to redundancies and finding, I think the estimate was $50 to $100 million in cost savings that they have repeatedly stated that they were on the high end of that estimate. So they have made tremendous amounts of cuts, and it's finding savings in all of these different areas as I guess the U.S. government is now applying the TKO strategy.
Well, yes. I mean, Ari Emanuel has a friend who's involved in that, but yes.
So some great reporting here from Brandon. You can read this whole story at WrestleNomics.com for more. And you would think, as the idea of boxing is continually being brought up, is the fact that you probably will see like a very overworked staff, at least depending on where your departments are.
Yeah, and I can add for what it's worth. This wasn't like a story that I was fishing for, that I started, getting in touch with employees. I had employees really go out of their way to raise this to my attention. So I think it speaks to the frustration that there is with the employee base.
And not completely connected to this, but myself and Neil Flanagan, we're doing a book review this week, and it's Brian Gewertz's book that came out a few years ago. And one of the chapters is on the XFL, and it does give you some insight into what that several-month period was like, where here is Brian Gewertz, who is one of your lead writers that is still responsible for all of the television, but he is being flown every weekend to these XFL games to be doing writing for the various sketches. And
this is the first XFL.
The first XFL 2001. But like it is not like the XFL had this crazy like separate department. Like Michael Hayes and Bruce Pritchard are two of the key people that they're doing all this XFL work on top of all the WWE work. Yeah. Jim Ross, who has in later years stated he was paid $1,500 per game while he's calling the XFL, on top of the fact that he is doing his broadcast work, on top of the fact that he is your EVP of talent relations in 2001. So, I mean, it sounds like that period was as strenuous a time period for WWE employees as you can recall. And I would imagine there are elements of that today when there are just all these different pillars of what make up TKO that your report gives some kind of insight into. So I encourage people to read up on this.
And I guess to add something else too, clearly this management has been very focused on profitability, and we've seen that in things. Just Mark Shapiro's comments about the ticket prices and how they would positively encourage their live events team to make sure that they're charging enough for ticket sales so that they make enough money, that they make more money, I should say, on live events. And we've seen ticket prices go up for what that's worth. I mean, that's supply and demand. These tickets are getting sold. I have less sympathy for people who are complaining about the tickets being high in price when they're getting sold. Yet when you're not rewarding your employees, is that ultimately, I'm reporting here that their morale has been affected. Is that going to result in less productivity? That this is something that it's about investing in your employees. And if you want to have an employee base that's doing great work for you, that's going above and beyond, that's what investing in your employees is about. And I think that is a real risk here if we're only thinking about the economic outcomes here.
Let's move on to this shareholder lawsuit. So, Brandon, why don't you tell us just a bit about the background? Because these were multiple lawsuits that were consolidated, first filed back in 2023, and this is very much germane to the TKO merger.
So let's pull up File and Serve Express, okay, as we've all been monitoring
on everyone's bookmarks.
So this is not in federal court. This is in the good old Delaware Court of Chancery, which is where all the best lawsuits happen because everybody's incorporated in Delaware for business reasons, I guess. So in November 2023, this is when this all started. As I recall, Bloomberg broke this story that there's a shareholder lawsuit. There's this group, and it's usually this is what it is. It's pension funds, it's retirement funds who invest in probably tons of things. And one of the things that they invested in is they're saving money for their employees is WWE. And they're alleging that Vince McMahon forced his way back into the company, and he just predetermined that he wanted to do this deal with Ari Emanuel, his friend at Endeavor, who he had known for many, many years, and that resulted in WWE being undervalued. Now, there's a lot more that we can go into here, but that's the top level gist of what's happening here. They're alleging that Vince McMahon, yes, he forced his way back into the company, and then he decided that he's going to do a company transaction and pretend to shop the business around, but he really knew all along he was just going to make a deal with Ari Emanuel for specific reasons. So that began in November 2023 with the Ohio Pension Fund and a university professor named Dennis Palkin, who's been involved in previous W class action shareholder lawsuits. And then we had in April 2024 another pension fund, the City of Pontiac Retirees Fund, came along and also filed a lawsuit that was quickly consolidated into this lawsuit. And they just want the
1987 attendance records, I think.
I hope so. That's probably what they're trying to clarify. And this lawsuit is basically what makes this report new. This is not something that I had read, or I don't believe anybody has reported on, even though it is some 10 months old. And this goes into a lot of detail that we'll get to. But it's been consolidated into one lawsuit, as we talked about briefly last week before I had read everything about this. There have been a ton of subpoenas. Every firm that was involved, and there are many firms involved with a complicated merger like this one, they've all been subpoenaed for various records. All of the members of the board have been subpoenaed, or they've got their notice of service of interrogatories. They're being asked questions. So this lawsuit is very much still going on.
So in this lawsuit, they were able to obtain a portion of these meeting minutes after a legal demand was issued. So this allows stockholders to be able to inspect company records. And the minutes that were released, while somewhat redacted, there was at least some interesting aspects to what was going on involving the board of directors in June of 2022, which is when the first reporting came to light from the Wall Street Journal regarding the allegations against Vince McMahon, and learning for the first time that Manjit Singh and Ignace Lahoud attempted to resign from the board the day after that first Wall Street Journal report. But it was Stephanie McMahon, then still a member of the board, who was able to convince the two to stay on board, which they ultimately would. And then 2 days later is when Vince McMahon steps down on an interim basis while still remaining with the company, and Stephanie is named interim CEO and chairwoman.
Yes. So the minutes, so these are records apparently that are made to record what happens at WWE board meetings. These are not public. They were not made exhibits as part of this, but they were referenced and quoted in the complaints that are public. And as you said, there's a lot of things that are redacted here, but some things are not. And apparently under a law in Delaware, you can, if you're a shareholder and you have a proper purpose, you can make this legal demand. And WWE had to turn over these meeting minutes to both of these litigants. So yes, this is at the time of, so remember it's May 2022 that Stephanie has announced her temporary leave of absence. She goes on temporary leave, not as a board member, but just as an executive. So she's still serving on the board. And then in June, the Wall Street Journal breaks the first story about the NDA hush payments and allegations of sexual misconduct against McMahon. And as you said, it's the next day, according to the plaintiffs who are suing WWE, let's be clear, but according to their references of the meeting minutes, they're saying that the day after that, some members of the board, including Ignacio Laud, Manjit Singh, who eventually did resign later, they threatened to resign, but Stephanie convinced them not to, at least for the time being. What else is going on there?
So as the months go on, we do see some changes to the board of directors. Connor Schell and Erica Nardini both leave the board, although those are not painted as reasons attached to Vince McMahon. Their filings stating that it was not due to any dispute or disagreement with the company, its management, or any matter relating to the company's operations, policies, or practices. So take that on face value that they made these decisions, but it is coming shortly after this. July is when Connor Schell leaves. September is when Erica Nardini leaves the board of directors. And then the special investigation begins, and Manjit Singh is the lead investigator of that.
Jeffrey Speed is. Manjit Singh is the lead independent director of the board in general. Jeffrey Speed is the lead person on the investigation.
Okay. So Jeffrey Speed will come into focus in just a minute here when we talk about some of these changes. Now, we have gone over all of the turmoil, for lack of a better term, the end of December into early January, when Vince McMahon approaches the board, states his intent to rejoin the company. He is told that the board unanimously disagrees with this suggestion by Vince McMahon, who exercises his power and is able to reinsert himself as the executive chairman and removes several board members, including Jeffrey Speed, and puts George Barrios, Michelle Wilson into those spots. And it's upon Vince McMahon's return to the board of directors that Ignacio Lahoud and Manjit Singh do officially resign from the board in January 2023. So we have quite a change of the makeup of the board of directors over these 7 months.
Right. And they, so as we followed at the time, right, when these allegations came out, they were originally reported in June by the Wall Street Journal, but the board knew about this for a few months in advance because there was an email sent purportedly from a friend of Janel Grant who disclosed how she was allegedly mistreated by Vince McMahon and by John Laurinaitis. After these stories broke with the Journal, the board announced that they were going to start their special committee investigation. And by the time, so they did all that, and it was supposed to be an investigation into misconduct allegations, into the company culture. Vince went on, interim. He still headed creative, but he stepped down on an interim basis. Stephanie became the interim CEO and chairwoman for the time being. And this investigation happened, and according to the plaintiffs' references to these meeting minutes, they call it a sham investigation. They say that that there was hardly any report. What does it say here? It conducted a sham investigation of the allegations against McMahon. The special committee facilitated the cover-up by ensuring that they received no written materials throughout the entirety of that committee's existence. The special committee did not interview McMahon's victims, which is consistent with Grant's claims, did not reprimand or otherwise censure McMahon, received no interview memoranda, which I assume would be records of interviews, reviewed no evidence, made no factual findings, and issued no report. By the time of WWE's Q3 report, WWE is putting in their filings that, remember this is our favorite phrasing, that the investigation is substantially complete. However, they note that even after that, after they're saying to the public that this investigation is substantially complete, they've got records in the meeting minutes showing that, you know, there were recommendations still happening. They were still having meetings about this investigation. The special committee did not provide any recommendations to the full board until October 27th. And even then, the special committee merely recommended the investigation continue under the supervision of the audit committee, the compensation committee, and a newly created committee called the demand committee. No investigation had been, quote unquote, completed in any sense of the word. I'm reading from the plaintiff's complaint. But the release provided McMahon with an opening to return. He was able to return because at that time he held controlling voting power, and he was able to ultimately, in January, force his way back into the company.
I guess the other kind of interesting aspect to it is that after Vince McMahon's return to the board, they make the announcement that it has been he has now been unanimously voted to return to the board. And in this complaint, it lists the fact that Paul Levesque, Nick Khan, and Steve Koonin, who is still part of the TKO board, reversed course, that Steve Payman did not attend, board member Michelle McKenna abstained, and I guess it's a question mark regarding if, in fact, Stephanie McMahon took part in this vote as well. I guess that's not made as clear. But then she herself resigns from all duties from WWE the very next day after Vince's return, including stepping down from the board of directors. Right.
And it does, let's see, it does make clear that Manjit Singh and Ganassi would step down because of Vince's return, which Lahoud has said to the LA Times, I believe it was, but I believe around the time of the merger itself. But that makes it clear that, you know, that's why they were stepping down. Yeah, it's not made clear if, I mean, based on the timing that's described here, you would think that Stephanie would be there and had not yet resigned, but she resigns the following day.
And just wrapping this up here, it also notes the fact that other bidders for the company, they were willing to cash out all of the WWE investors, but the board pushed for the deal with Endeavor because Vince McMahon, A, would have a role in this new company, as well as the top executives being heavily bonused that Brandon went over.
Right.
I think
they're alleging that, you know, Vince was not going to, their theory here, right? Their allegation is that Vince was not going to take any other deal because that would have cashed him out, and that would have allowed that new owner to keep him out of the company. You know, they frame him as toxic and nobody wants to deal with him. And only Endeavor, only his friend Ari Emanuel was going to allow him to become part of the company. And then we have, you know, we can think back to those, to the CNBC interview where Ari insists that, oh my God, yes, we have to have Vince McMahon as part of this company.
Yes. And the fact that, you know, that had come out as well, that Vince McMahon was able to negotiate more equity out of his inclusion.
Right, which is bizarre. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, it's a pretty interesting complaint to go through. And, you know, I think it will be very difficult to argue that that this sale, that this has not been of great benefit of value to the company, but it's also looking at it from the perspective of these shareholders. But more importantly, it's information that they have at least been privy to through these meeting minutes that do give us some insight into quite a turbulent period when it comes to the shakeup on the board of directors.
Yeah. And to add some information that we get a little bit of light shed on who the bidders were. We already believed that Liberty Media was one of the bidders who was looking into acquiring WWE in some form. That's consistent with what we see here. Again, there's a lot of redactions, but Liberty Media has been subpoenaed here. And we also, something that's new to me is among the information that's being subpoenaed is information related to an entity called the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, which is a sovereign wealth fund with the United Arab Emirates. Maybe they were one of the financial sponsors, perhaps that's referred to in WWE's narrative of how this merger came together. But that's new information to me, and that I certainly took notice of that. And Vestry Light has been subpoenaed as well, and that is the firm that specializes in sexual misconduct investigations. That's the firm that the board brought in to help them with this investigations, and so they've been subpoenaed as well.
All right, at this point, we're going to welcome in our guest. He is the editor, proprietor of Slam Wrestling, author, historian, especially when it comes to Toronto wrestling himself. Greg Oliver is joining us here on Pollock and Thurston for the first time. Greg, how are you today?
I feel like I walked into some landmine here talking about all this deep stuff you guys are doing. I don't do deep stuff anymore. I'm much more lighter wrestling guy these days.
I don't know. You guys do a pretty strong job, I think, of covering a lot of these, the Janel Grant story and a lot of these different topics that, I mean, have been kind of front and center over WWE these past almost 3 years now that we're coming up on it.
A lot of that's been John Powell. His background really was news. When we actually started together and started the website back in 1996, John was doing news at what was canoe.ca at the time, and then I was doing all kinds of different stuff as well. So it makes sense he ends up doing a lot of the news stuff, and his entire, is the one that gets the notes from Janel's lawyers, all that kind of stuff. And I end up doing a lot of the obituaries and all that kind of stuff just because I know too much at this point. I guess that's a good way to put it. When you've been covering the business for over 30 years, you know where a lot of the proverbial and real bodies are buried.
Did you sense, like, starting in 1996, like, give me a bit of an idea of kind of just the online landscape that you were entering and what it was going to grow into over the next years? Like, was it just something that you were kind of going into this with without any idea of like what this medium was going to become, especially for professional wrestling?
Well, I mean, in general, I mean, the whole Sun newspaper wanted no part of the online, didn't think it would last. And we were jumping ahead and doing all that kind of stuff. We had the content, right? We had Bret Hart's column in the Calgary Sun. We had a couple of those different things, which is basically how we started. What I really miss about those days, though, is the interactions. People would email you all the time. Like, how many emails do we get these days, that are truly going to lead to anything? Everybody comments on social media. There's 1,000 different places to look at all that. You don't get that same interaction that you used to get in the days of raw HTML, where you had to hand everything by code, by hand. So good old days.
And did you find, being attached to Sun Media, did that help you in terms of having any kind of correspondence with WWE, with cooperation with WWE when it came to interview opportunities, commenting on a story, or was that an evolutionary process to, because WWE is always like a very interesting company when it comes to coverage and media covering it?
It's been up and down and always will be. The web ebbs and flows, relationships ebb and flow, people come and go, right? From PR, you can have a great relationship with the WWE Toronto office, which used to exist, which is awesome, right? They were here. This and that. Carl DeMarco, the Great Eight to the North, I believe they called him down in Stamford. He was a character in and of himself. Could have been a wrestler, and so we got a lot of access that way. But then it grew through the years, and you got to know the guys, your Joe Villas, your Adam Hopkins, those kind of things. We had to fight a few times to get access. Certainly having the Sun behind us helped at that point. And now here we are, almost 5 years into running on our own because Sun Media decided we were too expensive, which in retrospect is kind of ridiculous, but it is what it is. And we've been running our own site for almost 5 years. And it's been a challenge, but we can also have a little bit more freedom, and we're not tied into the Sun. And certainly the Sun wrestling coverage is a little bit, am I allowed to say bad words on this?
No, you can just go.
I would say blowjobby is the sort of term you call in newspaper world, where you're doing more praise and nothing negative. And that's certainly what, if you look at any of the Sun Media coverage, they don't say, well, they certainly don't cover anything beyond WWE and occasionally AEW if they come to town, but they're basically down on their knees blowing WWE for coverage, and the stories are just ridiculous.
You'll fit right in here.
I do.
I'm holding back. It's all good.
So, just following like Slam Slam Wrestling was the first site I ever came across when I got internet access in 1998. And when you guys ended up going independent, one of the things I was so happy for you guys was the fact that you were able to get all the rights to all of your archives, all of the stories going back all the way. Because that's something like when I left the Fight Network / Live Audio Wrestling, that was completely divorced. And that's unfortunate in this digital world, is that there can be so much stuff that is lost just to a website turnover. And I was really glad that you guys were able to strike such a deal that would keep those, because that's not typical in a lot of these moves when you leave a big chain like that.
Absolutely. I thought ahead, I guess. It was 2003 when they hired me back to just run the wrestling site. And, in my contract, I stated that we owned our content. And so when they came to us and said, you're done with us, we're going to cut it, I said, okay, that's fine. Here's the deal. You owe me all my stuff. You have to figure out how to get it back to me. So it took months before they had their tech guys actually get their act together and export it all into a system where we could then import it into WordPress. That was part of the frustration too, was Sun Media had already moved to WordPress, but because the wrestling site was so big and so maybe not complicated, but we had a lot of content, right? None of the other parts of the site had that much, so they'd never moved us into WordPress. And so that was very frustrating. Well, there's a blast in the past, yeah. Those are the good old days. That was a proprietary software, so it wasn't easy to transport. So they actually had to have guys coding in the back to move it.
We're looking at the old website via archive.org, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So that's where we are. Okay, yeah. And I don't give to a ton of charities every year, but certainly one I do is Internet Archive. They get a little bit of money, even though I don't get a tax receipt, right? Because we're Canadian, they're American. But that's one thing that they've saved my bacon numbers of times, because not everything poured over right. We lost the rights to all the Sun Media stuff, but I saved it all off. I have it all. If somebody really needed something, if they asked me nicely, I'd help. So yeah, it's been a good run, and I appreciate so many readers and fans through the years. And people come and go. We recently lost one of our longtime writers, Jamie Hemmings. She was only 43. She'd been writing for me since 2005. So just a little bit over 20 years. And then she's gone. Died in her sleep. They don't know all the details. Funeral was on last Sunday. And she's hugely missed. She was a really big part of the site. Like, she'd be the kind of person I would send. This story's a little bit controversial. Am I saying this right? Can you have a look? We all need those people, right? And that's what we often forget in this wrestling world, right? There's all these people that just want to spout off and say whatever they want to say, whereas we always do try to be journalists first. And there are lots of times you can't say what you want. But then we've also created a Matt Memories idea, just in the guest columns, where you can do the editorializing that really makes life a little bit more fun, right? And it's a place to do the sad stuff too. Did you guys ever work with Jamie at all, or read her stuff?
I read all of her stuff. Unfortunately, I didn't know Jamie all that well beyond her work, because I would imagine that the first time I came upon her work was the series of interviews she did with Barry Orton around 2006. And was that the first kind of coverage on Slam of the Ring Boy suit and going into that? And just as an editor, how were you sort of overseeing like that type of coverage? That it's obviously this is at a period when several of the key figures are still alive during that period too.
Yeah, I don't remember much else before that. And again, it kind of goes back to the idea that the Sun didn't do a lot of hard-hitting stuff at all. So there wasn't a lot of that stuff that was given to us. So anything that we did do, we had to create our own. And by 2005 and 2006, we'd grown a lot in our ability to do stories. And Jamie came along with a newspaper background, and she befriended Barry Orton and got all kinds of stuff. But it was her empathy, right? It was her ability to make friends with people that really helped a ton. And that we saw that later with Tom Cole, that, she had talked to Tom Cole. She talked to some other Ring Boy stuff too that we've never used. It just wasn't publishable. And that's, again, not something that everybody understands these days. But there are times you just can't use it. You need to be able to verify things. You need to be able to really make sure all your screws are tight. And we don't have the Sun lawyer. There were a couple of times we did, contact the Toronto Sun lawyer to make sure the stuff was okay. But I don't remember that with the Barry Orton. The Barry Orton one was just very open, right? He just talked about all the things that happened. And he wasn't one of the necessarily the guys like Tom Cole that were abused. He was involved in all that and never really made that same claim, if that makes sense.
Right. Barry Orton alleges that he was propositioned by Terry Garvin. Correct?
Yeah, which is different than being abused like Tom Cole was by Mel Phillips. These are the stories we know, right? There's no doubt way more things, just like Nick Kiniski telling me stories about Terry Garvin coming on to them. There's no doubt 1,000 other those hosts. I know stories I can't post, that I've heard from people, just how terrible they are to each other. Wrestlers are a different breed. And having covered hockey, a little bit of baseball with the John Gibbons bestseller, all I have to say is I never hear these stories in hockey. I never hear them in baseball. Wrestlers were policed by themselves. They had all that time on the road. They never had to report to a general manager. All they had to do there was be there for their 15 minutes or 20-minute match. And that was it. Everything else, their time was their own. And boy, did they do some really, really awful stuff.
Did you ever feel like, to me, like this aspect, this early 90s when this was a pretty significant media story in the US, and then it sort of just, it evolved into the steroid distribution trial. And then after that, it sort of was this ugly part of its history, but was largely divorced among fans. And here we are all these years later, and this is back prominently featured. Did you ever think like there would be still like this level of focus and that ultimately a lawsuit would come forward on all of this? Or did you think this was just going to be brushed aside, as, a lot of discretions that you might hear off the record often are?
Yeah, no, I'm a little bit surprised it's back. I do have to credit, a lot of people that have kept this alive. I mean, John Arezzi certainly coming back in the spotlight and having access to all his old stuff, right? And he covered those actual events, right? Went to the press conferences, dealt a little bit with Phil Mushnick, all those kind of things. I think that helped a little bit. Certainly the Tom Cole death during the pandemic helped in the sense that it put it back in the spotlight. And we didn't have a ton of other things to do during the pandemic. So those things got a little more spotlight than maybe they would have. Yeah, it's a little bit surprising. There's still, as I said, there's still so much more evil out there in pro wrestling that has never been reported, that probably can't be reported in, like, from a journalist perspective. I just things I'll never touch, that I'll tell maybe over a beer or two. That's different.
It's something we often discuss too. Like, I think like people don't quite fathom like just the value of being at a company where you can be indemnified and have that legal support, that if you're independent, like the three of us are, like that's an aspect to all of this that you have to be very cognizant of. Like there's nothing that prevents anyone from launching a suit, and you have to be prepared to be able to financially support yourself if it comes to that. And for a lot of important stories that that need that type of protection, if you don't have the big backing of a company that is going to protect you legally.
Yeah, no, it's a little bit scary for sure. We try to err on the side of caution, but caution doesn't always get you attention either, right? Sometimes you do need to jump that next step. You got to break that story, But even on the fun side, right? Ed Wiskoski dies. He was a great friend of mine. I have this picture of him naked, standing beside a toilet where he just made a giant turd, and it was on film. And it's like, okay, I got to tell the story, but I'm not using that picture. But I'll tell people about it. You know what I mean? Like, nobody ever needs to see that picture. But that's, that's just a funny little aside. Trying to lighten the mood here a little bit. But wrestling's just a wild business with very little rules. And I don't think it's the same today. Like, I really don't, right? All these guys, a lot of them are playing games. They're not out in the bars partying all night. It doesn't mean they're not having fun out there, but and because of the advent of, everybody's got a camera and all the liability involved with all that, they're just not out there carousing the same way they used to. There's not those kind of stories.
We did want to have you on because this weekend, WWE is back in Toronto for the Elimination Chamber. This will likely be the largest gate for any Canadian show in history. And just going back to specifically to 1984, I just wanted you to kind of paint the picture, Greg, of like that period in Toronto's history where you do get Vince McMahon eyeing Toronto and coming into the city where it has been the dominant player. And this has been a WWE staple for these 4 decades. What were some of the circumstances around that changeover in 1984 and why Toronto was so important when it came to the expansion of the company?
Well, there was a bunch of things in play back around that time. They had been paired with Crockett for many years. Crockett and George Scott were partners in the Toronto office with Tunney. And Frank Tunney died in, what was that, 1983?
Yeah.
And so that changed the deal right there. The NWA moved back and didn't want really to be sending their guys up there. They were flying from Charlotte to Toronto to do TV tapings. It was a bit nuts if you think about it at that time period. So I think that the promotion itself was ready for a change. Tunney came along. Jack Tunney was more than happy to make a deal with WWE. And of course, he became the esteemed president of WWF, which we saw on TV so often. But from that perspective, it made sense. But the thing is, the media landscape was so different back then, and we forget that. The WWE Toronto office, WWF Toronto office, existed because there were different rules for selling TV in Canada than there was in the US, right? So you couldn't run those ads from the US and Canada. You needed a local broker. So that's why WWF Canada existed for, probably a couple of decades. Can't exactly remember when they shut the Toronto office, but it was a long time. And that was the main reason it was there. And then that transitioned to the pay-per-view reports or the pay-per-view shows and all those kind of things that they needed Canadian partners to do it. I mean, it's always amazing to tell an American we didn't have pay-per-view in Canada until about 3-4 years after it was available in the US. Like we were just behind. And so which Canada was a different market, and Toronto itself was a different market. It was different in Montreal, right? The same reason they had local promoters like Joanne Rougeau in Montreal to cater to that specific market. WWF was really smart about all that. And Toronto wasn't really a territory. It was just a place they came in. They'd run maybe a spot show in Kitchener or St. Catharines or Kingston. They didn't really run a ton of places in Ontario. It was very sporadic. So, it was a different time for sure. And we have to remember that when we look back at all this.
And what was like the relationship that Frank and then Jack Tunney had with like the local press? Because I think that's kind of you look at some of these wrestling hotbeds, and one of the consistencies is the fact that you did have a media that took, like, there was a degree of seriousness that the media took, or at least had credibility with the local promoters that saw media as an asset. Was that the case in this period with the Tunneys?
Well, throughout, if you look all the years, like through the 30s right into the 1980s, there was usually wrestling stories in the newspaper. Now, some of them were written by a guy named like Joe Perloff, who was basically on the Tunney payroll. So those have to be taken with a little bit of a grain of salt, essentially. And then there's others that came along, like, guys who went on to big, stardom, like Alan Ryan was a baseball writer. Well, he did some wrestling stuff early on too. So all these guys had to go down to the show, and they're often great little tongue-in-cheek reports, but the reports that were there. And the Tunneys, no doubt, buttered their bread by sending the guys bottles of scotch or whatever at Christmas to make sure they're always getting their coverage. Those little newspaper ads, they cost money, right? So there's a contra thing going on too, that the newspaper is getting something out of this. That didn't exist in a lot of other places, for sure. And that's when you look at some of these US markets and you're trying to find results from Chattanooga or something, it wasn't always in the newspapers regularly. So we were spoiled in Toronto. The both big newspapers, the Toronto Star and the Toronto Sun, both had newspaper columns. I was blessed that the Norm DaCosta and the Toronto Star promoted my newsletter back in the 80s. And so I then had a lot more subscribers, a lot being, a couple hundred, but, it was something. And it was a different media landscape. And here we are in this internet world where, apparently video trumps all these days.
Yes.
Don't I look good?
Norm DaCosta was, I stumbled upon when I was probably like 7 or 8 years old. And I remember always being very confused. Who is this anabolic warrior? Because I've never seen someone on television by this particular name, that he would always refer to him as the anabolic warrior. But yes, that would be my early education into Norm DaCosta. He
was a cricket writer mainly, so he was not the world's greatest wrestling writer. Let's put it that way. I don't remember him ever doing an interview. Right? They were all just notes.
Oh, yeah. It was all just opinion columns. And I mean, you can look back now. It seems like at most he was probably an Observer subscriber, I would assume. But someone that certainly, like it was never interviews and such. It was just, breakdowns of cards and his opinions and, obviously with a Toronto slant to it.
He would have fit in really well in today's wrestling world, right? Just writing crap. So
is he on Twitter?
No, he's
on
long
Facebook.
retired.
He's definitely on Facebook. I found him
Yeah,
once.
but I've never seen. You know what? I never met Norm of all these things. I went out of my way to make sure I met Ed Whalen, who did give me plugs on Pro Wrestling Plus, the TSN show he did. So I went out of my way to make sure to say thank you to a lot of people who helped me along the way. But Norm's a guy I've never oddly met, which is really strange, given how many people in the sports world I know these days through the hockey and the wrestling writing and the baseball too.
What exactly? So Jack Tunney leaves in 1995, and it seems like it's always kind of been shrouded in debate, like his ouster. But it's interesting that here is a guy who so much of his career is dedicated to pro wrestling, and when he's out, he is out. You just do not really have, like, there's no public discussion of a Jack Tunney until his death in 2004. Like, what is Jack Tunney's post WWF life or career, or was he sort of just out of sight, out of mind from most?
I think that's probably it. I mean, we never heard a lot about him. His family never told us much. It was funny because you would find occasional stuff showing up at garage sales. Like I ended up with some Tunney stuff from the garage sales.
Wow.
Like, so he was obviously divesting it, or the family was. I don't know all those details, but yeah, there's a lot of stuff we just don't know. His family obviously didn't want to involve. I mean, we also leave out often that Frank Tunney had a couple other sons, right? And Jack was his nephew. But his sons themselves, I mean, Ed Tunney was involved for a couple of years as the accountant for the company. And he was also involved with the CNE, Canadian National Exhibition. So, I mean, there were other Tunneys involved, but it wasn't quite the same thing. They weren't as deep into it. He had another son die pretty young. I think he was in his early 20s. So there's a deep story here that could be told someday, but man, that's a lot of effort to put into something that's going to sell, 200 books. And that's often what people, we see this all the time. Why doesn't somebody do a book about? And it's like, well, because it'll sell 200 copies and take me, half a year.
Do you have any books on the horizon, Greg?
I do have a big hockey book that I'm hoping the deal gets signed today or in the next couple of days. I can't say very much about it yet, but it's a sequel to a bestseller. And I'm really excited to get back in the hockey market. I haven't done a hockey book in a few years. The Gibby book was great. The thing about being a writer and doing books is there are a dozen books that come and go. I mean, my most famous one was Rocky Johnson, right? I had a contract that I had signed that I'm waiting for Rocky to sign to do his book. And then it never happened. So, you try not to say a lot ahead of time, but, even this past couple of years, like there was a WWE Hall of Famer I thought I was going to do a book with, and then it just didn't happen. And, my editor at ECW Press, Michael Holmes, he just said, you know what, you're destined for bigger things, which is you need people in your corner like that. And that goes back to the Norm DaCostas and the Ed Whalens and all the different people through the years. And as I was to Jamie, right? I'm happy to support people and do their best here.
When it comes to a topic that let's keep it to like pro wrestling, if it's going to, for all the time, effort you're going to put into this, are there certain boxes it needs to check for you when it comes to, I'm going to dedicate so much time to this subject? Like what does it require of you to say yes to a project when it comes your way, whether it's a Medusa or it's a similar subject matter that is that you're looking at as worthy of like the amount of investment that comes with it?
Well, I want to learn something, right? That's the important thing. If it's a story I already know, like I don't want to do it. I knew nothing about monster trucks. Working with John Arezzi, I had to learn a ton about country music. Like that's fascinating to me. I'd rather learn a lot more. Baseball, I mean, I was a baseball fan, but learning from Gibby was awesome. So with wrestling, who's out there that's going to tell me a lot of stuff that we don't know? There's very few guys that aren't so public these days that you do stuff. I've said it publicly before. I'd love to do a CM Punk book, but about hockey, right? He's a big hockey fan. You could meld in a little bit of career stuff, but do something truly unique, right? That would go over the markets. I'm the guy to do that. So I don't know if somebody approached me tomorrow, Triple H, and said he wanted to do his book, I would probably say yes, but you got to be honest with me. You got to tell me everything, and then we walk stuff back. That's my general rule. Like even Medusa, like, I mean, she's threatened me not to say anything about so many of the things until she's gone, and she'll be around for many years because she's one tough gal. But I mean, there's stories I know that we didn't put in the book on purpose, right? You got to walk stuff back. But as a biographer, you got to learn everything.
Well, for our sake, I really hope that we get the official CM Puck book by Greg Oliver. I'm sorry.
I know, wouldn't that be great?
Yeah, leave you with
we
that
got to
one,
get the
Greg.
rights to Peter Puck from Brian McFarlane, though. There's a reference that Brandon probably doesn't get, but yes.
I got that one. Well, Greg, I want to thank you very much for stopping by. I encourage everyone to go to slamwrestling.net and load up Amazon and just search Greg Oliver, the work that he has done along with Steven Johnson. It is the highest of recommendations. Like, really, you can pretty much devour the history of pro wrestling through the work of Greg Oliver, and go back years and years. They've got their archives going all the way back. So
can I just do one more quick plug related to that? So there's oliverbooks.ca, but we are starting a Slam line of books. We're going to do a Steve Johnson book. He wanted another book to be able to sell at events with his Jim Londis. So it's sort of like a best of Steve Johnson.
Oh,
we're going to do one on Jamie Hemmings too. Coming out. It's a way to spotlight the archive. So they'll be available just through Amazon in the coming months. So yeah, Jamie's we want to have out by her celebration of life in the summer.
That's great. And there is a section dedicated on the site to all the writing of Jamie Hemmings. I would certainly recommend the Tom Cole stories, the Barry Orton ones, a terrific review when Maura Ronaldo's documentary came out. Yep. There's it's really great that you guys have it. It's very easily accessible to go through all of her work because she was a very important voice, and it's very much spotlighted on the Slam site. So, Greg, I want to thank you very much for joining us. I hope we did not regale you with too much dark stuff, but we got into quite a lot here in this discussion. So we will do this again sometime, and we wish you the best.
Thank you, Greg.
Both. Take care.
That was Greg Oliver joining us, chatting about Toronto wrestling history. Did you go to that WrestleMania in Toronto, or was that too out of the way?
I was in like 11th grade. I was like 16.
All right. Yes, that was the last time they ran Rogers Center, and for all we know, we will see if they ever even run Rogers Center again. To be quite honest, it's not the most modern stadium, but it has got some significant upgrades. But yes, we have about 30,000 tickets out so far for the show, and we will see what the final nights bring for that show. They're also in Scotiabank Arena on Friday night as well. Before we go, are you ready for another lawsuit, Brandon?
Mm-hmm.
This is one of all the complaints you have read, Brandon. Does this one take the cake?
Well, there are complaints. I've read a lot of weird complaints. Well, a lot of times you get nuisance lawsuits that are written by somebody filling out a form, like handwritten. This is not that, okay? But I heard that John Pollock said that he would not even publish this complaint on the website.
You would not either, be quite honest, okay? There are some assertions here that are not backed up by any evidence, that are so clearly just opinion, which is fine, but
which is not out of the realm of norm for a lawsuit. They're stating things, by belief and information. Yeah.
When you clicked on this, did you expect to see Tony Khan in a neck brace at the NFL draft?
No, I did not. For reasons that are not made clear, let's bring it up. There is a photo of Tony Khan in this complaint where let's read the text that precedes it. Tony Khan is an individual residing in the state of Florida. Pictured here he is pictured at the 2024 NFL draft, and here's a picture of Tony Khan for people watching the video. It's just a picture of him in the neck brace.
Totally necessary. Yeah. Listen, I'm going to underscore all of this by. There are legitimate issues of contention on behalf of Ryan Nemeth. I just don't think like this complaint does that any kind of legitimacy if you read through this. It is a suit that Ryan Nemeth has filed against AEW, Tony Khan, and Phil Brooks, along with 20 unnamed defendants that are a mix of individuals and business entities that are anonymized. He is alleging assault, breach of contract, breach of implied covenant of good faith and fair dealing, intentional interference with prospective advantage. And that might be the only time good faith is utilized throughout this complaint. But it was filed just last week in the Superior Court of California, and we get the origin story of the Khan family, including how did Tony Khan become the head of AEW? Well, Tony ended up mismanaging Fulham, leading to multiple lawsuits against the club. Since he was a child, Tony loved pro wrestling and had an obsession with certain wrestlers. The Khan family formed AEW to provide Tony with something to do safely away from the family's other ventures. Tony serves as AEW's chief executive officer.
And not only that, he alleges that Tony alienated himself from most everyone in the Jaguars organization, as if he's not currently working for the Jaguars. At least the website lists him as the chief of. I'd have to look at his title, but he is still listed as a member of the office. And I want to be clear too. This complaint is dated February 14th. And we had some confusion about whether this complaint had been filed. We have confirmed that it has been filed as of last Friday. This is dated February 14th, but as of the 21st, at least, it was submitted to the court. This is in Superior Court of the State of California in the County of Los Angeles. So we have confirmed. I was, questioning whether it had been submitted to the court or not. It has been submitted to the court.
Yes. So among the listed complaints here, AEW turned a blind eye to Phil Brooks' conduct because of Tony's deep admiration for Brooks, because he was their most popular wrestling performer. At Brooks and Tony's insistence, AEW and Tony Khan have undertaken an effort to blackball Nemeth so he can never work again in the wrestling business. Which, as I mentioned on Monday, I think that's going to be a very tough argument when Ryan Nemeth is actively working in the professional wrestling industry with a national company in TNA Wrestling. So, I mean, the idea of being blackballed, I just don't think that has any argument to stand on and the assertion that Khan and Brooks are working together to keep him blackballed is the assertion here. When TNA has a active relationship with WWE where Brooks is employed.
Yeah.
So he's not doing a really great job of blackballing him, if that is the assertion.
Yeah. And we have his cage match profile pulled up here. Actually, on the day that this lawsuit was submitted to the court, he had a world title match between himself and Joe Henry. Sorry, spoiler alert, was taped for a TNA Impact taping. He's had a number of matches.
Just upset a lot of people, Brandon. That doesn't air till tomorrow night.
He's had a lot of matches for TNA. He's had some matches for independents as well. So he's still finding work in professional wrestling.
So the accusations include the fact that, as everyone remembers, when after Brawl Out in 2022, Brooks is brought back in June of 2023, and that is where he cuts his first promo in the ring, takes a shot at the Young Bucks. Nemeth writes online, the
world's softest man or something like that. I'll find the text.
Yeah. Not naming CM Punk by name, but everybody connecting it to this promo when
literally the softest man alive.
Yes. And then this ultimately led to a confrontation in the locker room where Brooks approached Nemeth and basically wanted to fight him. He's accusing Punk of assaulting Nemeth in the male talent locker room. In a menacing manner, Brooks shouted at Nemeth, "Do we have a fucking problem? Do we need to step outside and handle this like men?" Nemeth was cornered by Brooks and did everything he could in order to de-escalate the situation. Now I think this is a completely legitimate argument that Nemeth has. Like, here is somebody in CM Punk that is not just a fellow member of the locker room, regardless of status in the locker room. This is also, as we now know, an employee with the company in a leadership position, and Nemeth is in a no-win situation here. He either has to back down from this guy, or he gets into a physical altercation with a top star. This is totally, I would say this is the most glaring argument that Ryan Nemeth has here in terms of his treatment and the fact that this was something that was ultimately resulted in Ryan Nemeth being benched, as he put it, and being on a per appearance deal, and thus was not being paid during this period, even though he did have a contract with AEW.
And he details he raised a number of complaints to AEW management and nothing was done about it, according to him. And then he has the incident that he describes where he's booked for a Greensboro collision taping. And according to him, he goes, he's at the hotel waiting for his ride, and he sees one Phil Brooks and doing something on his phone, and he assumes that he's texting someone at AEW. And then he gets, according to his complaint, he gets a text then from Pat Buck, who's an AEW official, to see him as soon as he gets to the venue. As soon as he gets to the venue, he sees him and he's sent home. And he believes, for good reason, that he was sent home because of something that was raised by Punk. Yeah,
it's a good thing Punk texted the right Buck.
Yes,
that could have been a difficult autocorrect. So Nemeth was embarrassed and humiliated in front of other wrestlers who witnessed him being kicked out of the arena. More importantly, fans observed him leaving the arena. Pictures were taken and expulsion became viral on social media. This humiliation
is that
caused...
the case? Do we have those images?
I don't remember ever seeing any images of this. I mean, the story came out. This humiliation caused irreparable damage to the marketability and reputation of Ryan Nemeth. That is for you to determine if he was irreparably damaged from being removed from this venue. But then it states his last match in AEW was November 18th, 2023. And then it mentions on November 25th, 2024.
He says his last match was in 2024.
Oh, he mentioned his last match was 2024.
The years are wrong here, but yeah.
He's off by a year in both his last match and Brooks' first match appearance with WWE at the Survivor Series. So the defendants have embarked upon a campaign to blackball Nemeth from professional wrestling. Specifically, Tony Khan blames Nemeth for Brooks leaving AEW and has used his significant resources to make sure that Nemeth can never again make a living in wrestling.
And can we read these two paragraphs before that, where he says, Khan was heartbroken by the departure of Brooks, his idol, and that he adored in every way.
Like I couldn't believe I was reading this, and like this is in here. Like the man was heartbroken, and I mean,
Khan was furious with Nemeth. Khan believes that Brooks left AEW because of Nemeth.
Yeah, and let's remember, this is all this stuff with Ryan Nemeth is before the Jack Perry incident at All In in London. So, I mean, it almost feels like a bit of a conflation here of the Jack Perry and Ryan Nemeth situations that ultimately Tony Khan was the one who decided to fire CM Punk based off the recommendations of the disciplinary committee in November. So there you have it. Or sorry, he was fired in September and then November is where he goes to WWE. But It's quite the read if you want to go through these 9 pages, and I guess we will await. We have reached out to the defendants, and we will see if they ultimately respond to this suit, and if this goes anywhere. I mean, if this does, I think we're in for some entertaining depositions.
The defendants have not responded as of this afternoon. We have reached out.
If there are depositions, you and I are going to do dramatic readings of them. Okay. I get to be the lawyer. Okay. I'm calling on that one. All right. Final topics here. Of course, it is the Netflix minute. Okay. WWE. This one was interesting because yes, Raw, we have the data to go through, but this was also for international viewers, a much hyped SmackDown because of the 24-hour notice that Dwayne Johnson would be on the show. Did you hear that The Rock was on SmackDown Friday night?
I did. I watched this segment after the fact.
All 27 minutes.
On I think 2x speed, some of it, yes, but I did actually not, but because I have YouTube TV, I was like, oh my god, I can't speed this up. But anyway, I did watch it. And there's a phrase for the type of rhetorical devices he's using, where he's like, your dad, my dad, they were friends. You and I are friends. And as you detailed already, he's going on and on, saying a lot of words.
It was a lot of words. Not a whole lot of sense being made. But don't tell that to anyone in Bolivia, because SmackDown ranked number 9 in Bolivia. And I was only surprised that if there was a SmackDown that was going to crack some of these international listings in the top 10, this would have been the Friday. So maybe it was somewhat surprising that it only did rank in Bolivia, but did do a very strong number on the USA Network. This was their highest audience since moving to the USA Network last September. So you have to go back to the last week on Fox for a larger audience.
Which is still, as you can see in the chart here, still well below what they were doing on Fox. But this is the biggest one for total viewership. The demo, it was up too, but not to the same extent. I don't have quarter hours yet, but I'm sure those 27 minutes performed well, but we'll see for sure when I get them.
Then moving on to Raw, it was in the top 10 in 8 separate countries, including the US, Canada, and Mexico, and was basically flat with the week prior. We had 2.8 million views across 1 hour and 51 minutes in length.
Was this Raw exactly the same length as the prior week's Raw? Does that sound right to you?
It was, I think, off by like a minute or two of the edited version. It might have been an hour 52 last week.
Okay. Because exactly the same number of hours viewed, exactly the same duration, exactly the same global views is what Netflix put it in their ta-dum chart.
We're going to isolate that sound effect for every time that we have to reference ta-dum. So yes, any strong thoughts on how is the Netflix data coming your way?
It's all right. It was number 10. It's still staying in there. I guess, when they end up on in the NFL season, we'll see if it still stays in there. But then again, we're looking at a 7-day picture with all the DVR and so forth.
Is there anything in this top 10 that you have sampled besides Raw?
Let's see. No, I have not seen any of this. I've not watched Love Is Blind yet. I might have been subjected to a few episodes of Cobra Kai, but no.
I've been watching Court of Gold. It's actually a great series on the
There have been negotiations in my household about watching Apple Cider Vinegar, though.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe we'll get the Thurston review in the coming weeks. All right, so there you go. That is all of your Netflix data coming out tonight. We have Dynamite, and then, of course, don't have to watch Impact on Thursday because now you know the outcome of the TNA title match.
I didn't say what the outcome was. I just said there was a match.
Okay, well, Joe Hendry wins, everyone. I mean, come on. Imagine if Ryan Nemeth had won the TNA championship on Thursday night. That would have made this complaint even tougher. Yes. So anyway, this weekend, WWE's in Toronto for 2 nights. We've got SmackDown, Elimination Chamber, and quick scan here if we've got any questions here. Well, I will scan through these. But next week, we are going to be off next week. We will be back in 2 weeks' time. But Brandon will have coverage of the big Q4 earnings later tonight. So we've got a call tonight, presumably with Ari Emanuel and Mark
Probably
Shapiro.
in canned form. Maybe Mark Shapiro in live and in person. Yes.
Oh. He's we will see if he addresses any of the topics we have covered today.
The marketplace is frothy.
Yes. Briefly, we have a question about the blended views, and I think this is talking about the Raw viewership. I think we touched on that a couple of weeks ago, but we're looking at a 7-day picture, and the reason why the math doesn't quite check out for this ta-dum chart. According to Netflix, what they provided me with a table that shows that there are 4 different durations that they are measuring as Raw viewership after it's, when it's live, right after it's live, a little bit while after, and so forth. So that's why we get some discrepancies here in the math working out when it comes to duration times global hours viewed.
All right, it's a new world we're navigating on Netflix. So
TV rating discussion is over with. Remember, we talked about in December.
It's gone. No more metrics. What is coming up for you, Brandon, over the coming days? A lot of great reporting up at WrestleNomics.com. If you want to read more about the Nemeth lawsuit, the WWE staff morale, as well as the shareholders lawsuit. Brandon has been very busy the last couple of days.
Those full stories are there. The full story that I wrote for the shareholder lawsuit is up there for paying subscribers only. Also free for anybody to reference if they need to is the 2 full shareholder complaints are also at WrestleNomics.com. And Post Wrestling won't be publishing, I don't think, but I do have the full text of the Ryan Nemeth complaint at WrestleNomics.com as well.
All right, you can check out all of that. Again, we're back in 2 weeks' time for Pollock and Thurston. That is going to do it for us. Thank you to Greg Oliver for joining us from SlamWrestling.net. Have a great week.